All right, today we're jumping into a totally different way of thinking about large language models. Seriously, forget all the usual stuff about them being brains or databases. We're going to explore this really powerful analogy that connects AI directly to some of the most basic processes in biology. Let's get into it.
Okay, let this sink in for a second, because this one sentence is pretty much the key to everything we're talking about today. It forces us to stop seeing AI as a machine that knows stuff and start seeing it as a space where meaning gets built, moment by moment. It completely reframes the conversation.
So, where does a wild idea like this even come from? Well, it all starts when you realize that biological life and LLMs are both trying to solve the exact same problem. How in the world do you create stable, useful order from a total storm of chaotic input? Now, this is what's so cool. Look at the slide. The question is literally identical for both. Whether it's a cell trying to turn a long chain of amino acids into a protein that actually works, or an LLM trying to turn a string of text into a sentence that makes sense, the fundamental challenge is the same. It's all about reducing entropy, bringing order from chaos. The only difference is the material. One folds molecules, the other folds information. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the very beginning, the raw code in both systems. The blueprint that exists before anything has actually happened yet. And this is the key question, right? We know a protein's future is all laid out in its sequence of amino acids. So, what's the equivalent for an LLM? Where do you find its source code? The answer is probably not what you think. And here it is. The LLM's genetic code isn't the giant library of text it was trained on. Nope, it's the gigantic matrix of weights it learned from that text. And think about it. Just like a string of amino acids doesn't actually contain a 3D shape, an LLM's weights don't contain sentences. Both of them just hold the potential, the rules and constraints for what kind of structure can eventually emerge. So, and this is such a crucial point, that whole massive, expensive training process, that's not the model thinking. That's the model creating its DNA. After training is done, the model is basically like a brand new protein chain. It's packed with incredible potential, but it's totally dormant. It's just sitting there waiting for the right conditions to spring into action. Okay, so we've got the code. Now what? How does the whole folding process actually get started? Well, in both systems, it begins small. You have to create little, stable, local patterns to get a foothold against all that chaos. In biology, proteins start by forming these simple, repetitive little shapes. They're called alpha helices and beta sheets. They're the very first step toward creating order. So, what does that look like inside an LLM? The answer? Attention heads. They behave just like those biological structures. They're not reasoning or understanding anything. They are simply local pattern stabilizers. Each attention head is just enforcing some little grammatical or semantic rule, a connection between two words, and that reduces the chaos just enough to start building something bigger. This quote just nails it. We love to talk about attention like it's the magical part where the AI is thinking, but in this model, that's not it at all. It's just the internal scaffolding. It's the basic framework that makes a coherent thought possible in the first place. Okay, so we have our genetic code, we have our local scaffolding. Now for the main event. How do all of these little pieces come together and snap into a single functional thing that can actually do some work? So a protein folds into the one specific shape that minimizes its energy. It's the most stable configuration it can possibly be in. And incredibly, it seems an LLM response works the exact same way. A coherent answer is simply the state that minimizes what's called prediction entropy. It's the arrangement of words that creates the most semantic stability. Or, to put it simply, it's a thought that just makes the most sense given all the constraints. And this is the real punchline. Meaning isn't some file that gets pulled out of a database. It's a temporary, stable structure that is built on the fly during inference. Every single time you get a response, it's like a new protein being folded for a specific job, doing that job, and then vanishing. Now we get to the part of the analogy that is, frankly, uncomfortably accurate. Both of these systems are constantly on the edge of just collapsing into a mess. So how do they make sure the folding process actually works? So first, let's look at biology again. Our cells have these incredible helper proteins called molecular chaperones. Now, they don't actually determine the final shape of the protein, but what they do is create a safe, isolated little bubble for it to fold in. They prevent errors and keep it from clumping up. So what are the chaperones for an LLM? Well, there are all these tools we use when we run the model. Things like layer normalization, temperature settings, and yes, even our system prompts. None of these things contain any knowledge themselves. They are runtime guardians, basically. They act like bumpers in a bowling alley, just keeping the model from flying off into complete incoherent noise. This is just such a brilliant way to think about it. When you write a really good system prompt, you're not giving the model a list of orders to follow. You're building it a folding chamber. You are shrinking the universe of possible answers, which makes it way easier and more likely for the model to find a stable, coherent, and useful final shape. Okay, so why does any of this matter? It's a cool analogy, but what's the point? Well, it gives us a completely new and powerful way to understand not just how LLMs work, but maybe more importantly, why they fail. Using this model, you can see that a hallucination isn't the model lying or making stuff up. It's a structural failure. It is a semantic misfolding. When your prompt is too vague or the constraints are too weak, the folding process just fails. And what you get is a misshapen, non-functional, incoherent output. This puts it perfectly. The model isn't being deceptive, it's just become structurally unstable. It's a failure of the system to maintain that low entropy state. It's just like a diseased protein that has misfolded and become toxic instead of useful. And here, you can just see how neatly the whole analogy lines up. Evolution through trial and error, that's training. The folding process itself, that's inference. The chaperones are all our runtime tools. Misfolding is hallucination. And the energy source that powers the whole thing, ATP in a cell, is just good old-fashioned compute for an LLM. And this brings us to a really profound conclusion. You know, we keep asking if these models truly understand things. We ask that because we think of understanding as a thing you possess, like a file stored on a hard drive. But what if that's just the wrong way to think about it entirely? What if understanding isn't a thing you have, but an event that happens? And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to chew on. Maybe intelligence itself isn't some static property of a machine or a brain. Maybe it's more like a phase of matter, like ice or steam, a temporary, low-entropy state, a fleeting structure that only exists for a moment, while energy is flowing through the system, before it all dissolves back into chaos. Definitely something to think about.